The Old Kingdom is the name given to the period in the 3rd millennium BC when Egypt attained its first continuous peak of civilization, the first of 3 so-called kingdom periods, which mark the high points of civilization in the Lower Nile Valley. The term itself was coined by 18th-century historians, in the distinction between the Old Kingdom and the early dynastic period is not one which would have been recognized by ancient Egyptians. Not only was the last king of the early dynastic period related to the first 2 kings of the Old Kingdom, but the capital, the royal residence, remained at Aneb-Hedg, the ancient Egyptian name for Memphis. The basic justification for a separation between the 2 periods is the revolutionary change in architecture accompanied by the effects on Egyptian society and economy of large-scale building projects. The Old Kingdom is most commonly regarded as the period from the 3rd dynasty through to the 6th dynasty. Many Egyptologists also include the Memphite 7th and 8th dynasties in the Old Kingdom as a continuation of the administration centralized at Memphis. While the Old Kingdom was a period of internal security and prosperity, it was followed by a period of disunity and relative cultural decline referred to by Egyptologists as the First Intermediate Period. During the Old Kingdom, the king of Egypt became a living god who ruled absolutely and could demand the services and wealth of his subjects. The numerous references to the Old Kingdom kings as pharaohs in this article stems from the ubiquitous use of the term pharaoh to describe any and all ancient Egyptian kings. Under King Giza, the first king of the 3rd dynasty of the Old Kingdom, the royal capital of Egypt was moved to Memphis, where Giza established his court. A new era of building was initiated at Saqqara under his reign. King Giza's architect, Imhotep, is credited with the development of building with stone and with the conception of the new architectural form, the step pyramid. Indeed, the Old Kingdom is perhaps best known for the large number of pyramids constructed at this time as pharaonic burial places. For this reason, the Old Kingdom is frequently referred to as the Age of the Pyramids. 3rd dynasty. The first king of the Old Kingdom was Giza of the 3rd dynasty, who ordered the construction of a pyramid in Memphis' necropolis, Saqqara. An important person during the reign of Giza was his vizier, Imhotep. It was in this era that formerly independent ancient Egyptian states became known as nomes, under the rule of the pharaoh. The former rulers were forced to assume the role of governors or otherwise work in tax collection. Egyptians in this era worshipped their pharaoh as a god, believing that he ensured the annual flooding of the Nile that was necessary for their crops. Egyptian views on the nature of time during this period held that the universe worked in cycles, and the pharaoh on earth worked to ensure the stability of those cycles. They also perceived themselves as a specially selected people. 4th dynasty. The Old Kingdom and its royal power reached a zenith under the 4th dynasty, which began with Sneferu. Using more stones than any other pharaoh, he built 3 pyramids. A now collapsed pyramid in Medum, the Bent Pyramid at Dahshur, and the Red Pyramid at North Dahshur. However, the full development of the pyramid style of building was reached not at Saqqara, but during the building of the Great Pyramids at Giza. Sneferu was succeeded by his son, Khufu, who built the Great Pyramid of Giza. After Khufu's death, his sons Djedefre and Khafra may have quarreled. The latter built the Second Pyramid and the Sphinx in Giza. Recent re-examination of evidence has led Egyptologist Vasil Dobrev to propose that the Sphinx had been built by Djedefre as a monument to his father, Khufu. Alternatively, the Sphinx has been proposed to be the work of Khafra and Khufu himself. There were military expeditions into Canaan and Nubia, with Egyptian influence reaching up the Nile into what is today the Sudan. The later kings of the 4th dynasty were King Menkaure, who built the smallest pyramid in Giza, Shepseskaf, and perhaps Djedefre. 5th dynasty. The 5th dynasty began with Userkaf and was marked by the growing importance of the cult of sun god Ra. Consequently, Less efforts were devoted to the construction of pyramid complexes than during the Fourth Dynasty, and more to the construction of sun temples in Abusia. Uzaqaf was succeeded by his son Sahuri, who commanded an expedition to Punt. Sahuri was in turn succeeded by Neferir Kari Kakai, who was either Sahuri's son or his brother, in which case he might have usurped the throne at the expense of Prince Nepjerenra. He was followed by two shadowy short-lived kings, Neferefre and Shepseskari, the latter being possibly a son of Sahuri. Shepseskari was deposed by Neferefre's brother Nireni. The last kings of the dynasty were Menkau Horkayu, Jedka and finally Unis, the earliest ruler to have the pyramid texts inscribed in his pyramid. Egypt's expanding interests in trade goods such as ebony, incense such as myrrh and frankincense, gold, copper and other useful metals inspired the ancient Egyptians to build suitable ships for navigation of the open sea. They traded with Lebanon for cedar and traveled the length of the Red Sea to the Kingdom of Punt, which was possibly modern-day Somalia, for ebony, ivory and aromatic resins. Shipbuilders of that era did not use pegs or metal fasteners, but relied on rope to keep their ships assembled. Planks and the superstructure were tightly tied and bound together. Sixth Dynasty. During the Sixth Dynasty, the power of Pharaoh gradually weakened in favor of powerful nomarchs. These no longer belonged to the royal family and the charge became hereditary, thus creating local dynasties largely independent from the central authority of the pharaoh. Internal disorders set in during the incredibly long reign of Pepi II towards the end of the dynasty. His death, certainly well past that of his intended heirs, might have created succession struggles, and the country slipped into civil wars mere decades after the close of Pepi II's reign. The final blow was a severe drought in the region that resulted in a drastic drop in precipitation between 2200 and 2150 BCE, which in turn prevented the normal flooding of the Nile. The result was the collapse of the Old Kingdom, followed by decades of famine and strife. An important inscription on the tomb of Antifa, a nomarch during the early First Intermediate period, describes the pitiful state of the country when famine stalked the land. Culture. Egypt's Old Kingdom was one of the most dynamic periods in the development of Egyptian art. During this period, artists learned to express their culture's worldview, creating for the first time images and forms that endured for generations. Architects and masons mastered the techniques necessary to build monumental structures in stone. Sculptors created the earliest portraits of individuals and the first life-size statues in wood, copper, and stone. They perfected the art of carving intricate, relief decoration and, through keen observation of the natural world, produced detailed images of animals, plants, and even landscapes, recording the essential elements of their world for eternity in scenes painted and carved on the walls of temples and tombs. These images and structures had two principal functions: to ensure an ordered existence and to defeat death by preserving life into the next world. To these ends, over a period of time, Egyptian artists adopted a limited repertoire of standard types and established a formal artistic canon that would define Egyptian art for more than 3,000 years, while remaining flexible enough to allow for subtle variation and innovation. Although much of their artistic effort was centered on preserving life after death, Egyptians also surrounded themselves with objects to enhance their lives in this world, producing elegant jewelry, finely carved and inlaid furniture, and cosmetic vessels and implements made from a wide range of materials.